John Githongo, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thanks, Larry.
The chairman of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the position has been re-advertised because the first 68 people apparently did not qualify or were not good enough. What did you make of that?
Well, if one were to be cynical, it's a bit of theater that keeps us busy. So first 68 apply, no one is found suitable. You ask me this question, 3 months later, we're sitting here again. Another group will have applied and you'll be asking me the same question. I'll take a leaf from the Tanzanian President Magufuli, who removed the head of his anti-corruption agency, saying that the individual was good on paper, but lacked passion. And so, Kenyans are being treated to a bit of theater around the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
What do you mean theater?
Theater in games of people being picked up, investigations ostensibly being carried out, people stepping aside, stepping out, stepping back, and it's all become a rather confusing game to ordinary wananchi. So you have the appearance of a lot of movement on the anti-corruption front, whereas in actual fact, especially for the last 4 years, we have moved back fairly dramatically where corruption is concerned. This is by far the most corrupt government in our history. In terms of, if you look at procurement, and in terms of just the outright theft from parastatals to some of the big contracts, whether you're talking about the SGR, Eurobond, etc., it's absolutely outrageous. And it goes down, if you're looking at public land, whether land that belongs to schools and other such public institutions, there seems to be a very rapacious attitude towards public goods at a level that we've never seen before. At the same time, we're treated to this game of nice speeches by the president about corruption, when corruption is getting worse, meetings on corruption. I think he makes a State of the Nation address, which is always about corruption. But every time he makes a statement, things get worse. So we're moving in reverse, and one gets a feeling it's as if we're being conned as Kenyans.
We'll unpack all of those in a moment, but if you're an anti-corruption crusader, why didn't you apply for the chairman of the EACC?
The last time I looked at that act, the chairman of the EACC doesn't actually have that much power to do anything. The chief executive does. That would be a more interesting position for me. One doesn't want to go around making speeches and coming on TV and talking to Larry Madowo as friendly as this situation is with you. Been there, done that. So, and also you've also got to be confident that the people who are at the head of the executive are serious. I'm not convinced they are. They talk a good talk, but I don't think they're very serious about dealing with the issue. So one has to weigh all those kind of issues before going in to that kind of position. At a time when these ethics and these anti-corruption agencies across Africa are under challenge. Right. They're very rationale. They were created as a result of donor conditionalities at the end of the 1990s. They have worked nowhere on the African continent. So it's for us as Africans to think a bit more seriously about how we can come up with our own solutions for dealing with the corruption, which upsets our people so much, but we feel sometimes trapped by it.
So you say the chairman of the EACC is largely ceremonial?
Last time I looked at the act.
So the CEO, the secretary position is much more powerful and much more effective in fighting corruption? But overall, do we need the EACC as currently constituted? Will it be effective in fighting corruption?
The EACC, and I must say, its predecessors, it has had many predecessors: the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, the Kenya Anti-Corruption Authority, yes, the Kenya Anti-Corruption Police Unit. Those are all successors. It had a very turbulent history. Was created because the Attorney General's office was not prosecuting corruption. The police were not investigating corruption. So we created these specialized agencies. We copied the Hong Kong Anti-Corruption Agency. And after this almost 20-something years, it's a good time to reflect, not only what has happened in Kenya, but across the African continent, where the lessons has been one of a very limited success. Prosecution is the most blunt instrument available in the fight against corruption. And none of these agencies have done very well. And I think it's because we created these agencies to get around the problems at the Attorney General's office, to get around the problems at the police, whereas we should have actually grabbed the bull by the horns and dealt with the issues at the police and at the prosecutor's office, in the Attorney General, in the state law office. We didn't. And therefore, we created these institutions that are dangling institutional orphans that are far from the center of power, and therefore are used for theater. Whenever people like Larry Madowo and others make too much noise about corruption, somebody's dragged into court. The newspapers have him on the front page. 48 hours later, we've forgotten. But the executive can say, "Oh, look, we're doing A, B, C, D," whereas it's a bit of a, as I said, it's theater.
So if the prosecutorial powers were strengthened at the AG's office within the police, then we would not need the ESCC. Is that what you're saying?
If we had an Attorney General with the powers doing his job as it's supposed to be done, and a unit within the police operating within the law as it was, with the political backing to deal with corruption, it would be possible to deal with this major problem. Right now, we have a specialized unit, the EACC, which is what we decided to create because all this problem is so major. I think the time has come for reflection, because we also learn from what is happening in other African countries, where all these agencies have had it's a history of failure. And therefore, we should go back and fix the real problems. Starts at the AG's, starts with the presidency, the AG's office, the police. And my experience is when the police want to prosecute corruption, they're able to investigate corruption, they're able to. But they need to be very confident that they have the political backing to do so. Usually they don't.
Do you feel there is political backing right now to fight corruption?
No. There is no political backing to fight corruption. The political will is lacking in Kenya. Only that explains some of the things that are happening, Larry, of the meltdown of iconic institutions. Institutions and processes and traditions that, in a sense, define us as Kenyans, like athletics. I mean, our athletics body has managed that sector for decades very well, and now we hear it caught up in all manner of scandals and corruption, that kind of thing.
Most notably at the Rio Olympics.
Exactly. We've had a Kenya National Examinations Council, which has set examinations for all of us for decades, and we never really questioned the integrity of those examination papers. Now that's been thrown out of the window. When you see what's happening at Kenya Airways, what's happening at Uchumi, these are important institutions in Kenya in terms of the way we define ourselves as people. When we start having difficulty in those iconic institutions, then it's clear we're not winning this war against corruption, especially when people are not being held to account in a serious way for some of the difficulties that we're seeing in those institutions.
President Kenyatta has said repeatedly that his government has been the toughest on corruption. It is during his administration that cabinet secretaries have been shown the door because of claims of corruption, principal secretaries. And so he says no other government has been tough on corruption than his administration.
Talk is cheap. Talk is cheap, Larry. And people can step aside and step aside into cushy quasi-retirement or into this theater that we have of pretending to fight corruption. Say, oh, but so-and-so has stepped aside and somebody else has been brought in. It doesn't cut master. And when one walks the streets and asks ordinary people, do you believe in this? Which is for me always the basic acid test. Just asking the ordinary person on the street, the ordinary watchman downstairs, do you believe this fight is serious? There's no one who says yes. No one says yes. And you cannot fight corruption unless people believe. And the first real serious report or investigation into corruption in Africa was done in Tanzania in the mid-1990s by a former Prime Minister of Tanzania called Justice Joseph Warioba. And he went around the country asking ordinary Tanzanians, what do you think about corruption and how should we deal with it? And eventually his conclusions that he came out with were that at the end of the day, if you want to fight this, you've got to turn it into a movement that all ordinary citizens all get involved in this, that they believe in it to the point that they all sort of reject corruption. And so the president can make lots of speeches. If people don't believe him, then the corruption will continue to deepen, which is the situation we have now. People don't believe him.
So what are you suggesting here? Because a lot of people will say it's easy to criticize, but what are the proposals for how to better handle corruption?
There's nothing as, for me, I just point across the border at Tanzania to President Magufuli,
yes,
who was elected just the other day. People can point to many weaknesses, some of which can be substantiated, but look at what they've been able to achieve in a very short time in terms of the fight against corruption, without the grand sort of, 1,000 donors writing a strategy, etc., etc. By sheer will and people becoming convinced that he is serious, number one, as a president. Number two, he is not a thief. That's very important, that people believe that him and his family are not involved in this thing. And that creates a groundswell of confidence, which is expressed in the polls that are being conducted and that kind of thing. And so that's where you start, by people believing that you're serious about this.
And you don't think people believe right now that?
No. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here being asked these questions by Larry Madowo.
All right. That said, you gave a very strong critical speech to procurement professionals a few days ago, and you talked about procurement is perhaps the center of corruption in this country. How is it possible when we have some of the strongest procurement laws anywhere in the world?
Larry, our procurement regulations over the past decades have become more and more complex. They become more and more complex as it has been recognized that corruption is a bigger and bigger problem in Kenya. So we invite consultants who add modules onto it, who improve it, who bring us, benchmark it according to global standards, who digitize some of, the elements of procurement. Some of the supply chains are made more efficient. So we end up with a procurement system that presumes that the people who are engaging it are thieves. And so what I was telling the procurement professionals, and I was very impressed to see that there is a group of, there is a Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supplier professionals saying, listen, you guys sitting here in this room as procurement professionals, you know the crooks amongst you. You know the tenderpreneurs, as we call them, the South African term. You know them, out them. Create a code of conduct and a disciplinary mechanism, remove them from your number, so that when we go in, we don't need this, 1,000-page procurement rules. But so the integrity is, so that as people walk into the door to sell to government, those are people who are already people of integrity and can be trusted. And therefore, the investigations that can be done vis-a-vis corruption can be on a sampling basis. Right now, you're assuming a bunch of crooks are coming.
Right.
So you create a very onerous system, which actually plays into the hands of the crooks, who are able to hire lawyers, accountants, auditors, who then cook up all the documents to do the stealing.
How would you explain the rise of the tenderpreneur class? Because there's a lot of tenderpreneurs now in this country, people who become rich overnight because they win one tender or two.
That's what I was saying. Corruption has never been worse, where you have an entire class of people of no fixed skill or ability or professional capacity, whose commodity that they trade in is relationships. I know so-and-so, and I know so-and-so, and therefore I can get the following contract. And that only happens when it is allowed to happen, and when you have conflict of interest being normalized, when it is made normal for government officials and their relatives to go into business or to contort and distort government policy to benefit their private interests directly, which we are seeing. And that creates an entire class of people who have a huge amount of disposable, usually non-productive income. So what do? You buy nice clothes, cars, you build houses for rent and just enjoy the rent, and that's it. And so what I described in the beginning of this very dramatic deepening and spreading of corruption over the last 3 years has allowed the creation of this class. It is fueled, of course, by this major debt-fueled spending spree that the government has gone on, and that is what explains it. It rots institutions, as we are seeing, the institutions that we're talking about. It rots them, because it creates an entire generation of guys like you from the millennial generation who ask, hey, Larry Madowo, what are you doing at, struggling under these hot lights every day? There's one contract, and you're set up. So you have a whole generation that begins to think like that, which is very troubling and unfortunate.
The assumption has always been that the private sector was cleaner. It was a better way to do business. The regulations were harder, and therefore the corruption didn't exist there. Is that still the case?
No, that's not the case. Not anymore. I mean, globalization has also changed sort of the whole environment in which the private sector operates. We've also seen a lot of consolidations of certain key players in the private sector. We talk about the banking sector and the way they behave. The legal fraternity, the auditing, fraternity. So, and I'm sure you've read about it. It's in the newspapers every day. There are many companies, some of the largest companies in the country. You're not going to get a contract out of them unless you have paid something to somebody within the company. Right. Within the company, when corruption becomes endemic and systemic, then it is everywhere.
You're calling it the pirate class.
Yes, it ceases to be a private class, a private sector, yes, and becomes a pirate sector. Especially those unique individuals, and this is not unique to Kenya. It's happening around the world, and it's causing unhappiness even in developing countries. Of people who specialize in making deals. That's what they do, when you ask for details, it's light on the details. But all they do is they trade in the commodity is the relationship. I have these relationships, I can bring these people together, and these are it's the language of commissions, success fees, commitment fees. That language becomes part and parcel of what's going on. And, one of the things that has happened is, there's a sense in which the morality has been sucked out of certain sectors. Banking, for example, some elements of the legal sector, of accounting. I mean, look at some of the companies that are in big trouble in Kenya today because of corruption. And you wonder, which accountant signed off on those accounts? Right. So, but what has happened, and I said this is not unique to Kenya, we have within even some of the world's largest, quite respected private sector entities, what I call pirate institutions. I remember when the company Siemens, a few years ago, was caught out on a major bribe-giving exercise in its developing world activities. It literally had a unit within Siemens. All they did was pay bribes. And they kept the books very well. It was very efficient little bookkeeping, bribery-paying unit. Recently, we've heard about BAT here in Kenya and the stories around that. So clearly, that's what I call a pirate sector. And even an ostensibly reputable global company can have within it a pirate unit that specializes in the business of corruption.
Okay, When you talk about the corruption but conflict of interest, does that also include, for instance, what the former EACC chairman Philip Kinisu and one of his companies doing business with NYS while he was investigating it? Would that qualify?
That is definitely conflict of interest. I mean, I don't want to talk about individuals specifically, but that's conflict of interest, and it's an unfortunate case because he's somebody who had done a major job over his career. He had retired from Pricewaterhouse as the chief executive, I think, of Pricewaterhouse in the whole of Africa. But people will now remember him for something which is quite murky and unfortunate and ugly. That was definitely conflict of interest, and he knew. I think he must have known that.
Okay. Do you fear for your life when you say these things?
No, and I think that they need to be said, and you need to ask. I think that we owe it to ourselves, because when you leave here, Larry, in the evening today, on the weekend, you'll be standing around with friends and you'll be talking about this. Am I right or wrong? This is what you'll be talking about. You'll be talking about that person who is a friend or was a friend who went into the tenderpreneurship business and life has been transformed. And you ask yourself about the basic values. Yes, you're waking up early, coming into the studio every day. You feel a bit, making the rest of people feel a bit like suckers.
Right.
So we have a duty to do it, and the more we do it, the better. One of the things that I'm finding quite encouraging is that, one finds institutions like as you said, the procurement specialists. I think one feels the same rumblings within the law society. One feels the beginnings of such rumblings within the accountant's profession. That's what's needed.
Do you get threats, though? Because you've left the country once after your whistleblowing, very public whistleblowing. You left the country for some time.
I don't, in the past couple of years, you get abuse, which comes to the territory. You'll get the occasional threat, but if it's anonymous, then it's not really serious. So you keep on, people, when you're talking about corruption, especially when you talk about tenderpreneurs, it's something which they defend with great determination. So it's not something which I would say is a problem that stops me from doing my work.
All right. General Githongo, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. A very important conversation on corruption and the challenges around there.